All right, well, we can get started and let people continue to join as we go. But thanks so much for joining us on this absolutely gorgeous day. If you're in West Michigan, I know it's probably a hard decision to get on a webinar tonight, and we appreciate you being here. I'm Jamie Vaughn. I work for Trout Unlimited, and I'm the Great Lakes Engagement Coordinator. So we are going to hear a presentation today by Jake Lemon, and we're going to talk about the White River watershed. But first, I will hand it over to Lance Climie of our awesome local TU chapter, Schrems, West Michigan.
Hello, I'm Lance Climie. I'm from the board of directors of Schrems, West Michigan Trout Unlimited. Happy to be here tonight to give you an update on what's going on in the White River. This is a project that has been going for some time, actually. I have to give a shout out to Mark Hying and Charles Chandler, who are residents of White Cloud, who started quite a few years ago clearing the river for kayakers. And that went to engaging Schrems to try and get some more work done. And personally, I've actually started fishing in the White River in 1961. So I have a little bit of a track record with it. But we have a couple things coming up. If you really want to get involved in the White, this will be a good program to start tonight. But a couple of dates to put down. We have some stream cleanups that we have scheduled for this year. We have not publicized this yet, but at the Vita Weaver Park in Hesperia on May 14th, which is a Saturday, we'll have a stream cleanup day there. And then on September 24th, we're actually planning a stream cleanup that's going to have spots you can work and volunteer at all the way from Whitehall to White Cloud. So it's going to be a pretty extensive day, and we'll have more updates coming for you. So we'll capture your email address tonight so we can keep you updated on all this progress as well. But right now I want to introduce Jake Lemon. Jake is the Monitoring and Community Science Manager for Trout Unlimited. And Jake, take it away. Thanks.
Thanks, Lance, and thanks, Jamie. Jamie, chime in here if there's anything else, but just so folks know, I think you all are muted, but there is a chat function, and feel free to enter your questions into the chat box, and we'll probably just go through the presentation and then answer questions at the conclusion. So that's where you can ask questions. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick it off. So hey, everybody, my name is Jake Lemon. I think I know some of you out there, some of you I don't. I'm TU's Monitoring and Community Science Manager based in Rockford, Michigan. I've worked for TU for about 10 years and relocated to Michigan in 2018. So when I came to Michigan, I was kind of hearing some, just talk of the White within TU and how it was an area that could use some increased focus for cold water conservation. And so I started directing some of my partnership grants with, the Forest Service and others to start learning more about the White and just getting to know folks who are doing great work in the White, and learning from that history and that knowledge of conservation and the White River fishery and the watershed as a whole. Groups like the Schrems West Michigan chapter, the White River Watershed Partnership, the kayaking group. Nicole DeMall, who's my supervisor and also wrote the White River Watershed Management Plan in a prior job, and just working towards, just a better understanding of what's going on in the watershed. And so that's kind of, I guess, springboarded into a more robust effort within the watershed. We've got a lot of stuff going on. And so today I'm just going to talk through kind of our past work, our work that's sort of in progress, and then some plans for the future. And so really all of this, all of these efforts that we've been facilitating is just trying to work towards having a better understanding and foundation of information for data-driven strategies and to develop partnerships to implement good conservation work in the watershed. So next slide. I suspect many of you are familiar with the watershed, but for anyone who isn't, it's a Lake Michigan drainage in West Michigan, basically between the PM and the Muskegon, and Oceana, Newaygo, and Muskegon County. It's a watershed. If we go to this next slide, that has some varied fisheries. So this map you're seeing here is some temperature data that we've collected in the watershed. So at a very basic level, blue is like prime cold water temperatures for fish, green is good, yellow is kind of edging towards marginal, and red is not great temperatures for cold water fish. And so you see we have some headwater sections in the upper south branch here super cold water. It's very groundwater driven there. Great wild and naturally reproducing brown and brook trout populations. And then as you move downstream, you enter the town of White Cloud, where there's a dam that significantly warms the stream. It's been measured a few different times, but roughly about 8 degrees Fahrenheit warming below the dam versus above the dam, which turns it into a little bit more of a marginal cold water fishery in this middle section. One that is where the DNR plants something like, I think I heard 40,000 fish or some brown trout to support the fishery there. That number could be off, but and then you have a number of drainages. We have Martin Creek and Mina Creek, which some of you might know, that are cold, that are coming into the South Branch area. So there is some natural reproduction in this area. There is a stocking supported fishery in this area, and then wild fish and most to some degree in the main branch and also in the tributaries. So once you hit Hesperia, there's another dam, and this dam blocks the lake run fish, salmon and steelhead. And so you have a nice steelhead and salmon fishery downstream of Hesperia, and then the tributaries here that are, for the most part, pretty cold. And then we have the North Branch, which is, really great cold temperatures, good habitat in a lot of the sections. Sort of anecdotally, we have good wild brown trout populations. You have steelhead and salmon moving up into there, and then brook trout as well. And so, and then you move down here into White Lake, which is, is more of a drowned river mouth of fishery. So it's a really interesting watershed, one that has, varied land uses. We have national forests, we have farming, we have private forest lands, we have towns. And so it's got a lot going for it. And there's also, a lot of opportunity, I think, for significant improvement in the watershed. So next, I'm just going to kind of jump into some of the monitoring and assessment work that we kicked off, just to start learning more about the watershed. So the first thing I ever did here, personally, TU has had work in that watershed in the past, but the first thing I personally led was a survey using our Rivers app. So this is basically a smartphone-enabled form for uploading geolocated photos of habitat issues or water quality issues, stream disturbances. You can see some of the categories here on the left. And so we, I think in 2019, worked with the White River Watershed Partnership and Schrems and some other partners to pull together some volunteers to just walk and float the river, take pictures of what they see, document issues. You see these yellow dots. These are areas with lacking riparian vegetation, for example. And so it was a great opportunity to just get a sense of what's going on in that watershed, what some of the needs are, and also get to know people who care about the watershed. I think we had 25 or 30 volunteers that helped out with that survey. And I'll talk later a little bit more about how we're using that data. I also have a partnership with the Forest Service, where we do pretty extensive temperature monitoring throughout the national forest. And that's what enabled us to collect that watershed-wide temperature data that I showed in a previous slide. We've also been using an environmental DNA to document species distribution in some different watersheds. And so basically, eDNA is just a method of, you basically filter stream water, you filter out all the suspended material in stream water, and then use genetic tools to find markers of particular species. So basically what it enables you to do is go out to a site, filter some water through this little paper filter, send it into a lab, and they'll tell you what species of interest that you ask them to analyze for. They'll tell you if they're in that section of the stream. So we had those analyzed for brook trout, brown trout, and rainbow trout. And you'll see here at the top left is our brook trout, and you'll see they are pretty much everywhere, side of one small tributary. Same with brown trout, pretty much everywhere aside from one small tributary. And then rainbow trout, as we suspected, were more prolific down below the dam. We did have some hits for rainbow trout, and I've heard rumors of potentially some wild rainbow populations that sustain sort of here in the middle watershed. So this was done in November of 2020. There's some question, we did have a lot of these brook trout and brown trout hits in areas that are warmer And so there was some question of, well, are they using that seasonally? And so we went back last summer and sampled some of these areas for brook trout in July, and we still got positive hits. And so, that could be indicative of smaller patches of cold water refuge areas that support small populations of brook trout. They haven't really seen those in fisheries data that DNR has collected in those areas, but there are apparently some amount of brook trout that are surviving in some of those warmer middle reaches, which was interesting. So we also support the White River Watershed Partnership and others in the deployment and maintenance of real-time monitoring stations. So think of these as like basically a USGS station that's sort of scaled down, lower cost. The data, and I should have put a link in here, is hosted on monitormywatershed.org. And basically these are solar powered monitoring stations that collect water temperature, water depth, and electrical conductivity. We currently have 2 in the watershed, 1 on the north branch and 1 on the south branch, and there's plans to deploy a few more. These are great tools for our monitoring and research, and also for recreationists who spend some time in the watershed, that have access to real-time data on temperatures and flows. So, basically it takes a measurement, uploads it through the cellular network, and folks can see what the temperature is, 5 minutes ago at that particular site. There's also a USGS gauge on the lower river that measures discharge. So continuing with our sort of monitoring and inventory work, last summer we did a road stream crossing inventory of the upper south branch of the White. And, many of you might be familiar with this, but TU does a lot of aquatic organism passage work. So basically this is identifying where there are barriers to fish passage that may not enable fish to reach cold water refuge or reach areas with a good forage base, or just move through the system and share their genetics, and having access to large interconnected patches of habitat is really important for the health and the resiliency of these populations to things like climate change and other habitat disturbances. And so there was some inventory work that had been done back in, I think, 2016 by the White River Watershed Partnership, and some done by the Muskegon Conservation District. And we looked at that pretty heavily early on, and used that as sort of to inform where we prioritize, as well as to do our ocean crossing inventories, as well as just trying to focus on some of the highest quality habitat in the watershed. And so here you see these point maps of all the barriers we assessed. I think there was something like 35 last summer. Red is basically a full barrier to fish passage. These are usually like perched culverts, or sometimes culverts that have water rushing through them so fast that fish can't move through them in an upstream fashion. We have barriers at high flows. That's the yellow one. Barriers at most flows, not a barrier. And so we're just in the early stages of digesting this information, and working with the Muskegon, or the Newaygo Road Commission, the Forest Service, and other partners, and just starting to prioritize where we might focus efforts. One that jumped out here is Flinton Creek, which is a cold tributary to the south branch, where we did have some full barriers and some barriers at most flows here. And so it's pretty chopped up as far as fish passage goes. It might be a good opportunity for sort of a small watershed wide focus area on aquatic organism passage. So, but those decisions that remain to haven't been made yet, and we're still at a point of sort of digesting this data. We also have plans to expand upon this pretty dramatically in the coming summer season. We're going to focus based on trying to do a full scale road stream crossing inventory of the north branch of the White, and then probably some of the other tributaries to the south branch. We'll be working, we'll have our staff out there. I think we'll be working with the White River Watershed Partnership and Muskegon Community College to have some students out doing some of these assessments. The Forest Service is going to be chipping in with some assessments as well. And so, it's just about kind of getting the lay of the land, identifying where the needs are, and identifying the potential opportunities in regards to aquatic organism passage. And so that'll be sort of a focus of ours in the future. And so as we're collecting this data, we'll start to look into, again, identifying priorities, and then fundraising to support those projects. In conjunction with all this data collection, we did a pretty intensive search of all the existing data that was out there in the watershed relevant to the work we're doing, things like macroinvertebrate assessments, habitat assessments, things, and the data that we've collected on temperature, things of that like that, and brought this all together into a sort of decision support application that visualizes this information and makes it easy to share. So this is something that, when we're talking about where there might be project opportunities with partners and things like that, this is sort of a central tool that brings all this information together into one place that we can sort of navigate around and look at characteristics of particular parts of the watersheds and think, different types of information that has been collected. And so this is hosted on ArcGIS Online. It is publicly available. Again, probably another opportunity where I could have put a link in there, but I could probably share that in the chat at some point. So, this was done, most of this work with the road stream crossing inventories, the temperature monitoring, the eDNA. Most of that was done with support from the U.S. Forest Service and in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. So they've been a really critical partner of ours in the White River watershed. So alongside of all this work, collecting data, getting the lay of the land, trying to, create a foundation of information so that we can develop data-driven strategies for cold water conservation, we've also been working hard at just connecting with partners in the watershed and building collaboration around restoration and protection and watershed related work in the White River. With support from the Fremont Area Community Foundation, we basically work to develop and convene a stakeholder group called the White River Watershed Collaborative. So this is basically a group of over 45 organizations that have a stake in the White River. They vary from, groups like TU and the White River Watershed Partnership to local municipalities like White Cloud and Hesperia and, Whitehall. To conservation districts, state agencies like DNR and Eagle, federal agencies like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Forest Service and NRCS, to economic development interests like the Hesperia Chamber of Commerce and the Right Place. And so it's a pretty I think a pretty robust and a group that's still continuing to grow. We're still finding people that we need to connect with and loop into this effort. And it was, a really nice sort of varied perspectives on the white. And we convened a consensus workshop, I guess just over a year ago now, with support from the Fremont Area Community Foundation, where we brought all these folks together to basically do some facilitated brainstorming of priorities. And it's sort of centered around this question of what should we focus on in the White River in the next 3 to 5 years. And so we got some really good information out of that's helped driven our approaches that we'll talk about here. And it's really been a great way to facilitate partnerships and share information. And it's already starting to bear fruit as far as fostering collaborative projects around the watershed. So two kind of focus areas preliminary at the outset seem to be sort of this, research and monitoring to help us better understand the needs of the watershed, as well as better understanding and understanding and leveraging the watershed as an economic resource for the local communities. That was something that was of great interest to a lot of the groups in the watershed. So we've developed 2 subcommittees that are really starting to dive into more of the nitty gritty of action items for this group. We have our research and monitoring subcommittee and our economic opportunity subcommittee. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what each of those groups have been doing. So the research and monitoring subcommittee, it includes TU, the White River Watershed Partnership, DNR, the U.S. Forest Service, some riparian landowners along the river, the West Michigan Environmental Action Committee. And what we've really focused on in that group initially is just a gap analysis of the data that we have in the river. So we we're just looking at what information we have and what information we need to make good data-driven strategies for the work that we're doing. And so this analysis has some sort of preliminary outcomes. One is the need for more road stream crossing inventory, which we're getting at, which I've already talked about, and we're getting at this summer. There's not a ton of information on habitat conditions. So, wood in the stream, stream substrate, the things that are useful in understanding where we need to do habitat restoration in the areas we should prioritize. And so we'll be starting the process of filling some of those data gaps this summer, doing some habitat mapping with the Michigan Council of TU and some of our staff, and probably collecting maybe some additional temperature information and things of that nature. Fish data, there's a lot of historical fish data in the watershed, but a lot of it is from, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. There's not a ton of new data. DNR did get out and collect some good fish data on the South Branch just a year or two ago. That's been really useful. And so we're looking to continue that effort by doing some fishery surveys on the North Branch. The DNR is committed to doing that this year. And that'll help sort of fill some of our knowledge gap of what kind of fish populations we're looking at there, because that area hasn't been surveyed in a long time. So there'll be that. There's potential that we'll do additional fish surveys in the watershed, but right now the North Branch is kind of the focus of that, and potentially some spawning habitat spawning surveys as well. And then a final one that's been mentioned is some issues with algal blooms and eutrophication in the lower watershed. And so we're still kind of figuring out what we can do to better understand and get at that issue. So there's lots of work as far from a monitoring and inventory side of things, and it's something that we're really focusing on right now. We also have our economic opportunity subcommittee, as I mentioned. So this includes the Right Place, which is a economic development group, and they have a staffer that focuses on Newaygo County, or I believe just Newaygo County, that's been really involved in this. TU, the City of White Cloud, White River Watershed Partnership, Hesperia Area Chamber of Commerce, the Forest Service, various landowners, and then the Newaygo Parks and Recreation, Newaygo County Parks and Rec. So that group they've done a couple things. They've submitted an EPA Recreation Economy for Rural Communities proposal. So basically what this is it's a proposal to get technical support from the EPA and consultants on doing planning around revitalizing communities with a recreation economy. What kind of changes can a community make that'll better enhance the recreation economy for community revitalization? And so if that was awarded, basically it would support professional facilitation of focus groups and development of basically a planning document, and then assistance with fundraising to implement the plan. And so there were 120 applicants for that, or semifinalists, so one of 20 that are semifinalists, and there was just an interview the other day. So we'll be finding out if that was successful or not in the near future. Also, there was a sort of a stated goal within some of our early conversations in that group to look at developing a White River economic impact assessment. So this has been done on the Rogue, it's been done on the Huron River. I'm sure there's others in Michigan, but basically it looks at how the river benefits local communities economically, both through recreation and associated spending, as well as property values. And so that group is working with Grand Valley State University to develop a plan to conduct one of those studies, and have just started fundraising to basically fund that work with some local community foundations. So that's something that's in development. Lance mentioned the stream cleanup. So Schrems hosted their first stream cleanup last, I think it was early October, and it was I'd say a big success. We had 30 some volunteers that came out and picked up a ton of trash in the watershed. It was great to see that kind of energy around the White River. We had local people who were from the area. We had people coming from Grand Rapids and other nearby communities. We had anglers, we had students, and it was just a really nice opportunity for folks to get together and do some good work in the watershed and leave it look better than it was the day before. And so it's awesome that Schrems is looking to scale this up. And I'm, like Lance said, pencil in, I think that I don't want to say the wrong date. I think it's May 14th. Yes, May 14th, pencil that in, and then I'm sure you'll hear from Schrems or myself about, registering for that opportunity moving forward. So really, really cool project there. So kind of getting into the current project side of things, another one that just took place last year is the Diamond Point Stream Bank restoration. So for those of you who spend time in the White, you might know the Diamond Point stream access. This is on Forest Service land. It's managed by the Forest Service. And they reached out to us with basically some problems they were having with the deterioration of that access. There was sort of a retaining wall that was falling apart. And they were wanting to look at sort of a more natural approach to restoring that stream bank rather than putting in another retaining wall. And so we helped them design and implement a restoration of that bank and that access that uses, basically graded the stream bank back to the original contour and used various sort of more natural approaches to enforcing it and keep in leaving it in better shape and a more resilient bank and access point moving forward. And so that was completed. It's still not 100%. I mean, there's still some riparian plantings and things that need to occur, and it obviously needs a growing season to look good as new, but you'll see a before picture here on the left, and then it's sort of in construction picture here on the right. So alongside of that project, we did a riparian planting last year. So you can see another phase of that Diamond Point project here. And we had some volunteers that came out and helped us plant, I don't know how many, hundreds, if not thousands, I would say thousands of trees, 1,000 or two probably trees in that restored area. We are probably be doing another planting there just to fill some gaps, a smaller one this spring as well. We also have our Tree Army program, which Jamie leads, which is a really awesome program that I think they've planted something like 35,000 trees in West Michigan along rivers and streams in the past few years. And they did a nice project in the White River along 5 Mile Creek, I believe, and the South Branch. They had a 40-acre property where they planted 2,000 seedlings in an area that was devoid of riparian vegetation. And they actually hired work crews for the summer that did most of these plantings. And so that was a really cool project that happened last year. And then we're working on developing some additional riparian plantings that'll be more volunteer-based and hope be a good volunteer opportunity for folks to get some hands-on work in the watershed. We have one potential one in development with and we're having some conversations with MDOT to do one of these on one of their properties. And there's potentially others in the work. And really a big part of that is leveraging that rivers assessment to identify where those are needed. And so I see that being something we'll do in the coming year or so. So keep an eye out for that. We're also starting to get more involved in logjam and wood management on the White in the last year or so. So we mentioned the kayaker group that's led by Charles Chandler and Mark Hying, and I'm sure there's others that have put a ton of work in on just using good good DNR approved practices that maintain wood in the stream and the positive benefits of having habitat benefits of having wood in the stream while allowing watercraft to pass through these areas safely. And so, they've had a ton of work opening up the White River for paddling over the past, I don't know how many years, probably 5+ years. And we're looking to start to build off of that and create some sustainable support for logjam management in the White. So, basically the way this worked, in the past, a lot of times groups would cut entire trees out of the river to allow kayaks and drift boats and others to pass. And while that does allow boat passage, by removing having wood and trees in the stream has huge benefits to fish and macroinvertebrate populations, creating habitat, good habitat conditions, good hydrologic and geomorphological complexity in the stream. And it's just, it's good. Basically, wood is good in the stream when it comes to fish and bugs. So, there's approaches to, again, allowing passage of boats while keeping as much of that wood in the stream as possible. And this could be, basically cutting out small sections of the log jam or using a grip hoist, which is basically like a come along you see here in this picture, to pull log jams basically downstream so that they're still in the water, but then you have passage on that opposite bank. And so we did a little bit of this work, working on some log jams below, kind of in the Taylor Bridge area last year. And we do a lot of this with the Forest Service. It's a partnership that we have with them. We've done it on the PM for years and years, and then some of it on the pine. And I just heard that the Forest Service has elevated the white to their #2 priority for this type of work. So I think we'll have more capacity kind of to work on managing some of these log jams in the future, which I think will be some good work. Kind of getting into some future work here. So the Forest Service reached out to us about looking at doing some habitat work on Martin Creek. So this will be, to some degree, doing some of this wood addition, some woody habitat work. So placing basically wood in the stream and the positive benefits you get with that. And as well as addressing some of the older structures that are in there, and how those will be addressed will depend structure to structure, sort of a situation specific context. But some of these structures are starting to deteriorate, and so we'll be looking to work on some of those as well. So that's something, I don't have a timeline for that. It's something that's sort of in the works, and I'm hopeful that there'll be some volunteer opportunities associated with that. So I talked a lot about aquatic organism passage earlier. This is something that TU does a ton of, throughout the country, really, but in Michigan as well. And so, I've covered most of the stuff, I think, for the Upper South branch. The one here on the left is on Skeels Creek, and it's a culvert that's been causing some upstream flooding and would be a huge project, but one we've had some discussions about. So, this aquatic organism passage work is something that I see us really beginning to fundraise for in the coming year, and hopefully have some projects to implement in a couple, 3 years in the watershed. And so that'll be something that's building up there. The White Cloud Dam, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm sure many of you are aware that the dam does have a significant temperature impact on the river. Like I said, it raised, according to the last round of monitoring we did, it raised temperatures by roughly 8 degrees Fahrenheit, transitioning from a really high quality cold water fishery upstream to a more marginal one downstream. So this has been, I guess, through the White River Watershed Collaborative and some other connections, the town of White Cloud actually reached out to us asking for just information on the option of dam removal. And so we provided them with some information, some presentations. We actually developed a little report for them that's sort of a preliminary analysis of the dam removal option for the White Cloud Dam. And they took this to their city council, and actually just had a community forum last night in regards to dam removal. And the community, for the most part, is very adamant about keeping the dam. This all came about because of some bills they had as far as dam repairs that were mandated by Eagle, and the city council ended up voting to pay for the current repairs. And so that, the White Cloud Dam potential removal is sort of tabled. It's tabled for now. The community decided, it's a decision of the dam owner, which is the city of White Cloud. And the community decided that they're going to continue to pay for repairs. And so that's sort of the situation at the moment for the White Cloud Dam. Another small dam that we're looking at in the watershed is the Mini Pond Dam. So this is on Mina Creek. Some of you might maybe have camped at the Mini Pond campground there. And this is an old dam. It's probably, I think, 85 years old now. Started to deteriorate. And the Forest Service reached out to us about, started to do some investigation about the potential for removing this dam. We dug up some old temperature data from probably 20 years ago that indicates does have a significant impact on stream temperatures on Mina Creek. We plan to deploy some temperature loggers this year to, document that, provide some more up-to-date documentation of that potential temperature impact and understand that better. The Forest Service is also going to do a use study just to better understand, how many people are using the campground, how many people are using that impoundment. And we'll also be looking at the impoundment itself to understand kind of where it is in its life. So basically, as impoundments age, they fill in with sediment. And, every dam basically has a life cycle where you get to a point where you either have to remove the dam or dredge the pond to remove all the sediment. And so we're going to be doing basically a survey of depths in that impoundment to understand kind of how much sedimented it is and how much longer of a life it's likely to have before it is fully sedimented in. So that's something that's like, sort of in conversations in the works. It's not a done deal by any means, but we're just collecting information to inform it moving forward. So I think that's all I had. Yeah, that's all I have. So we had a lot going on in that watershed. We have some really great partners. And, I want to call out White River Watershed Partnership, Schrems, West Michigan TU, and the kayaking group and the other folks who have been so great in just like sharing information and helping me understand what's going on in that watershed. It's been a big learning curve over the past 3 years. And I think we're really positioning ourselves well with the right data, the right partnerships to identify good projects in that watershed and make a difference. So I think with that, we could probably do some questions. Jamie, do you want to facilitate that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jake. So it looks like we have a question already in the chat, but feel free to send those in via the Q&A function or put them in the chat and we'll get those addressed. This first one is regarding your eDNA study and the brook trout DNA that appeared in warmer stretches. Could that be a result of drifting down from colder stretches, or does that indicate that brook trout are present there?
That's a really good question, and one that we wrestled with a little bit. I mean, there's definitely the potential that it could drift down from tributaries, basically. And we chose sites that were as far away as possible from any tributary. We work with the U.S. Forest Natural Genomics Lab on this work, and their guidance generally is that if you have a population of fish they have to be within about 1 kilometer of your sample for you to get a hit, or they become too diluted. That DNA becomes too diluted to really show up through eDNA. And so we set all those sites, except for, no, actually, I think all of those sites were more than 1 kilometer downstream of a cold tributary. And so, it's not 100% resolved, but to the best of information we have, in the approach we made, we think my guess is that there's probably some springs or groundwater seeps that are supporting sections of cold stream, or maybe some really small sort of unmapped tribs that might be supporting some of these populations. So, you can kind of it's sort of a soft takeaway of our brook trout using these sections. And until we actually get in and find them with electrofishing data, we won't know 100% certain, but there's some early indications that.
Jake, I can add to that a little bit.
Sure.
We actually did a live tracking of brook trout on a study through Grand Valley and Cedar Creek, and we real-time tracked the location of these fish over a 2-year period. It was pretty amazing how the brook trout will find the cold water seeps, and a lot of times that's why groundwater is so important streams, because you'll find places where really cold water is coming up, but you don't expect it there at all. But the brook trout know it's there, and they will find it and stay there during the warmer parts of the summer.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, we got another great question from Mike Small again. What are the maintenance costs on the White Cloud Dam?
Those vary, it depends on each inspection. Basically, the Eagle Dam Safety provides a list of required, if there are deficiencies, they provide a list of required repairs, and then the White Cloud engineer comes up with a cost estimate for those. So, there was an inspection back in 2019, and I think there was like $140,000 in repairs for that. There'll be another inspection this year as well. And so, it vary. I don't know what the year-to-year maintenance will vary. I think, I've heard roughly $20,000 a year on year-to-year maintenance. But just like a used car, as dams age, they require more intensive and more frequent repairs. So I'm sure the cost will probably increase over time, but I guess that remains to be seen.
Thanks, Jake. We've also had a few people ask about some of the maps that you shared, like the eDNA. Are those publicly available or something that you can share to the group?
Yeah,
or-
so those are in the decision support tool that I mentioned. And I can actually drop a link to that in the chat. All the data that I showed you all is in that mapping application. So I'd be happy to share that.
Thank you. Another one on data. Is there an established channel for anglers to contribute to the data pool?
So right now, the way I have had some anglers and volunteers contribute to the sorry, I'm entering this. Let me enter this chat. Talking and typing at the same time is difficult. All right. So, you know, from the river study with some of our temperature monitoring, we've had volunteer involvement, and I expect to have more and more opportunities like that in this year and moving forward. And right now, what I have is sort of, you know, basically when there's a volunteer opportunity, Schrems reaches out to their network to find volunteers. And then I keep a list basically of people who have volunteered in the past or have reached out to me specifically with interest in volunteering that I'll email these opportunities to. So I have a list of like 50 people that we get a lot of volunteers from. And so, you know, I think if people are interested in volunteering, if you're a member of Schrems and you get their emails, you'll hear about those opportunities through them. If you're from a different area, maybe a different chapter or not a TU member, probably the best way is to reach out to me and get on that email list that I keep. And you can see my email here on the slide. So feel free to reach out to me and I can add you to that list. So I do anticipate having some more opportunities in the future for volunteers, you know, community science and data collection.
Thanks, Jake. We've got another good question from Dave. Could you explain the different type of barriers that you showed earlier in the presentation?
The different types of barriers?
Yes.
Okay. So most of the barriers in that map that I showed are just road stream crossings. So they're culverts. You know, it's basically where a road crosses a stream. There's a culvert. Some of them pass fish, or some of them may be bridges as well, and they pass fish. But usually the barriers are some sort of culvert. I think I have a picture of one of them earlier in the slide. Let's see here. Yeah. So that's an example. We have like sort of a triple culvert. You know, I think the downstream, this is the upstream end, the downstream is basically perched above the stream level. So there's like a little waterfall of water pouring out of that culvert. So there's basically very little chance, except at very high flows, that fish can actually get through that culvert to access the upstream section. So that's mostly what it is. And we do a ton of work, again, working with county road commissions to get grant funding to replace these, and often, you know, putting in, you know, there's different kinds of structures you can put in that allow fish passage. And they're also, an added benefit is they're more flood resilient. So these structures that we put in that add fish passage, they're much less likely to get blown out during large storm events. They have less maintenance costs for local road commissions. And, you know, they are less, they do not cause upstream flooding like some of these do. And so, you know, road commissions tend to love this work. We work a lot with the Newaygo road commissions and some Newaygo road commission and other watersheds like Bigelow Creek.
We've had a couple guests ask about your engagement with private landowners, and if there has been any engagement with them so far, what that might look like, and what impact does the natural river status of the White River have on management as well?
So we do have some private landowners that we've connected with, both on sort of a project level, like we have opportunities to, you know, for projects on specific parcels, and we've connected with those landowners. We do have some landowners who are actually on the White River Watershed Collaborative as well. And, you know, I want to connect more. You know, we've done some, I think, some decent outreach connecting with landowners, but there's so much more of that we could do. And I think that'll be a process that will kind of roll out in the coming years and, you know, have more opportunities. I think riparian plantings is one great opportunity to work with landowners along the river. And I think there'll be more too. So there's been like some work there, but there's more work to be done. As far as the natural rivers status, you know, it does basically it's designated as a natural river by DNR. So there's basically a permitting process for any development, within however many 100 feet. I think it's maybe 200 or 300 feet of the river. And so it limits riverside development. I haven't worked a ton with that other than getting permits myself for work that we've done in the watershed. But it does result in a more natural setting for folks who are recreating and paddling on the river.
Thanks. And Lance made a great point in the chat that this kind of resurgence to focus on the White River was really started by a group of landowners who are really passionate about it. So there are certainly so many people within the watershed and on the river that care deeply.
That's a great point. And we have landowners who are also donors to our work. And so we have some really good landowner partners in the watershed.
All right, I got another couple of questions on the dam. I might try to mix into one. What would it cost to remove the White Cloud Dam? And what do you think is kind of keeping the community from embracing that as a kind of a sentimentality of its, historicness and its presence in the community for so long? And if at all, what do you think might move them in that direction for its removal?
So cost to remove the dam, I don't know. That would come out if they actually did a full feasibility analysis for dam removal with like an engineering firm. Then you would get an actual cost estimate for dam removal. I'm sure if you ask someone who was a dam removal expert, they could give you a range, but I don't have that off the top of my head. Let's see. The second part was what's keeping them from embracing that as an option. So there's several factors. One is that dam has been there since I think 1879 in various iterations. And so, it's a fixture in the community. That pond is a fixture in the community. Folks have lived there their entire life and it's always been there. And so there's a certain emotional attachment and nostalgia for that feature in their community. It's also, the whole pond is ringed by landowners. There's like 32 part landowners around the pond, and they currently own land on a pond. And so it's a big leap sort of mentally to understand, how that might affect them to own land on a river instead. And how that could affect property values and also just how they enjoy that area. And then there's also a swimming area in the pond that gets a lot of use. A lot of the upper part of the pond's pretty sedimented in, it's only a few feet deep, but the lower part of the pond is still pretty deep, and they have a little beach there and it gets a lot of use. They have free swimming lessons every year for all the kids in the community. There's a fishing derby event that drew like 500 people last year. And so they see it as sort of a central part of their sort of aspect and defining feature of their community. And so there's a lot of love for the dam, and it's a priority for a lot of people to in the community to keep it. What can move that? It's hard for me to say. I mean, it could come down to economics, and just, if the town can afford to continue maintaining and repairing the dam, that's probably what it comes down to. And they'll have to continually reassess that as bills come down for repairs, and whether that's something they can pay for, or if they may have to do other fundraising or taxes to raise those funds.
Thanks, Jake. We got another question from Tom Workman. Has there been any discussion about establishing fishing zones on the White, like there's been on the PM, like flies only sections, no kill sections, things like that?
I haven't really gotten into that side of things at this point. If the DNR proposed something like that, I'm sure we would comment on it and provide our input, but that's not really something I've looked at.
Another dam question. Is there a potential design that could bypass the pond to have a portion of the water, bypassing that to reduce the thermal impact?
That's a question that's come up in the past, and the best answer that I've gotten from people who know a lot more about this stuff than I do about is that you could probably retain a small pond, but it would be way smaller than the current. I think it's like maybe 40 acres. I don't know off the top of my head. but it'd be much smaller than the current pond, but you could probably retain a small pond.
Okay, I think we got to all the questions. If you have any last questions, feel free to throw them in the chat and we'll get to those. If not, somebody did ask if this will be shared, and we did record this presentation, so we'll be sure to share it out on our Facebook page, the Trout Unlimited's Great Lakes program. I'm sure Schrems will gladly share that out as well. So please do look for that if you want to reference any of the great information that Jake shared throughout the presentation. Please go ahead and take a look for that when we send that out. I don't see any other questions coming in, but I'm really, really so happy that so many of you took the time out of this beautiful day to come and listen to what's going on the watershed. And I'll hand it to you, Jake, for any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I just appreciate you coming out, spending time with us tonight. I know it's a nice weather out there, and so I appreciate you taking the time to hear about what we're working on. And so we're looking for more commuter and supporters, more community and supporters in the watershed. So, reach out to me if you have an interest in getting involved, and we'll go from there.
All right, Lance, any closing thoughts from Schrems?
No, there's just so much potential in this river. I mean, if you think about it, this is an economically distressed area. And if you think about what the Pere Marquette has meant to that local community, I think the White has the capability of doing the same thing for Hesperia and for White Cloud. So there's a lot of potential there, and that's why there's a lot of focus being paid on the economic end of this. And that is, again, is being led by Julie Burrell of the Right Place in Grand Rapids. She is assigned specifically to Nuevo County.
All right, thank you guys all so much, and keep a lookout for this presentation to be shared later on, and for the upcoming White River cleanups and more opportunities to get involved in what's going on and this awesome movement on a really fantastic watershed. So thanks all so much for being wonderful advocates for the river, and I hope you enjoy some great fishing this spring. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.